The soft rays of morning sunlight filtered through the hotel room's curtains, casting a golden glow over the space. Julia stirred, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the brightness. Turning her head, she saw Nathan curled up under the blanket, his tiny fists tucked beneath his chin, his breath slow and even. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. "Mommy," Nathan mumbled sleepily, shifting slightly. "It's okay, baby. Go back to sleep," Julia whispered, carefully slipping out of bed. She padded across the room and opened the door to find Jai was standing there, effortlessly elegant in a chic beige coat and black heels. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Jaiwa teased. "Ready to find your new home?" Julia smiled, stifling a yawn. "Give me 30 minutes. Jaiwa chuckled. "Take your time. I'll grab us some coffee downstairs." After getting herself and Nathan dressed, Julia stepped out of the hotel, finding Jaiwu waiting beside her car. "Let's go, lady and gentlemen," Jaiwu said dramatically, swinging the car door open with a flourish. Nathan giggled, climbing into the back seat. "I like you." Jaiwu smirked. "I knew I'd win you over." As they drove through Seoul, Julia couldn't help but take in the sights. The towering skyscrapers, the rush of pedestrians, the blend of modern architecture with traditional Hanok rooftops nestled between sleek buildings. "You'll get used to it," Jaiwa said, noticing her awe. "I hope so," Julia murmured. Jaiwa grinned. "Now, let's find you a place that screams home." The first few apartments didn't feel right, but when they arrived at a modern yet welcoming building in Seoul, Julia felt something shift. The moment she stepped inside, she exhaled deeply. Nathan looked around, then nodded firmly. "Mommy, I like this one." Jaiwu raised an eyebrow knowingly. "You feel it too, don't you?" Julia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Yeah, I do." Jaiwu clapped her hands. Then it settled. "Welcome home, Julia." For the first time since stepping foot in South Korea, Julia felt a sense of belonging. Julia stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the creases in her blouse. Her heart pounded, not just from the anticipation of starting a new job, but from the possibility. The possibility that she might run into him one day. Minjun. Shaking the thought away, she grabbed her bag, pressed a kiss to Nathan's forehead and headed out. The towering glass structure of LK Group loomed in the heart of Seoul's bustling business district. Julia adjusted her blazer and took a steadying breath before stepping inside. The lobby was grand, polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of pendant lights, an air of quiet efficiency surrounding her. Employees in sharp business attire moved past, their conversations in rapid Korean. She approached the reception desk, where a woman in professional clothing glanced up. "Hello. How may I help you?" "I'm Julia Mensah. I was recently hired as a business strategist." The receptionist nodded, checking her system. "Ah, yes. Please wait a moment." As Julia stood there, absorbing her new surroundings, a group of executives strode past. Something made her turn slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. Minjun. He was walking alongside another man, deep in conversation. He looked exactly the same. The sharp jawline. The intense eyes. The quiet confidence in his stride. For a fleeting second, she thought she was imagining it. But as he drew closer, the truth settled in her chest like a weight. Her husband was alive. Here. And then, their eyes met. Something inside her shattered. There was no recognition in his gaze. Minjun looked at her the way a stranger would, like she didn't exist. Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled at her sides. Without a second glance, he walked past her. Julia's world tilted. He didn't remember me. "Ms. Mensah?" The receptionist's voice snapped her back to reality. "Your department manager will take you to your office now." Julia forced herself to move, but her heart remained behind, staring after the man who had once held her whole world in his hands. The man who had completely forgotten her. Her legs felt heavy as she followed the department manager through LK Group's sleek corridors. Her mind spun, her heart beat a wild drum in her chest. Minjun was here. Alive. Breathing. And he had walked past her as if she were no one. She clenched her fists, trying to steady her emotions. What happened to him? Why didn't he recognize me? "Miss Mensah." Julia blinked, realizing they had stopped in front of an office. "This will be your workspace," the manager said, pushing open the glass door. "I'll introduce you to the team later, but for now, please get settled. If you need anything, let me know." Julia managed a nod. "Thank you." The moment the manager left, she shut the door behind her and collapsed into the chair. "This doesn't make sense." Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Hesitating for only a second, she typed his name into the search bar. His profile appeared instantly. Minjun Kong, CEO of LK Group. Pictures flooded her screen. Press conferences, corporate meetings, charity events. He looked the same. But his eyes. Something was missing. What happened to you, Minjun? A sharp knock on the door startled her. She quickly put her phone away. The door opened, and her manager stepped in, her expression unreadable. Ms. Mensah, the CEO would like to see you. Julia froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. CEO? Minjun. The manager gestured for her to follow. Come with me. Her legs felt like lead as she walked. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead. Then they stopped. A door. The manager knocked once before pushing it open. Sir, the new strategist is here. Julia stepped in. Her breath caught. Minjun sat behind a grand mahogany desk, flipping through documents. He barely spared her a glance. Leave us, he said. The manager obeyed, closing the door behind her. Silence thickened the air. Minjun finally looked up. His gaze locked onto hers. A wave of emotions crashed over Julia. Then, sit. His voice was cold. Detached. Not even a flicker of recognition. Julia swallowed hard and slowly lowered herself into the chair. Minjun leaned back, studying her. You're the new strategist? She forced herself to respond. Yes. No reaction. No hesitation. Just nothing. Minjun closed the folder in front of him. Tell me about your experience in business strategy. Julia took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay composed. She couldn't break down now. Not here. Minjun's sharp gaze was on her, waiting for a response. I worked as a business strategist for one of Ghana's top consulting firms, she said, keeping her voice steady. My expertise is in market analysis and expansion strategies. Minjun nodded, his expression unreadable. Why South Korea? Julia hesitated for a second. The truth was too complicated to explain. I wanted a new challenge, she answered carefully. Minjun didn't react. He simply leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. You'll be working on a major project starting next week. Make sure you're prepared. His voice was distant, professional. Cold. Julia could hardly believe it. This was the man who once held her in his arms, whispered dreams of a future together, and kissed her goodnight. Now he was speaking to her like a stranger. Understood, she replied, fighting to keep her emotions in check. Minjun gave a brief nod, then glanced at his watch. That will be all, he said. Julia stood up, gripping her hands tightly to stop them from shaking. As she turned to leave, she stole one last look at him. Still nothing. Not a flicker of recognition. Her heart ached as she walked out of the office. The Minjun she knew was gone. And for the first time after arriving here in Korea, she felt lost. By evening, exhaustion pressed down on her. She was packing up when her manager, Ms. Park, approached with a bright smile. Julia, don't leave yet. We're having a welcome party for you. Julia blinked. A party? Ms. Park nodded. It's a tradition whenever we have a new team member. Everyone's waiting at a nearby restaurant. After everything that had happened today, the last thing Julia wanted was to socialize. But she didn't want to seem unfriendly. She forced a smile. That sounds great. The restaurant buzzed with energy. Laughter, sizzling meat, bottles of soju clinking together. Sua, one of the more talkative employees, leaned closer with a teasing smile. So, Julia, do you have a boyfriend? Julia hesitated before shaking her head. No. Really? Dae-young, another colleague, raised an eyebrow. A beautiful woman like you? Hard to believe. Sua nudged him. Maybe she just hasn't found the right person yet. Julia forced a small smile, but before she could respond, Hyunwoo, one of the senior employees, shifted the conversation. Julia, what made you choose South Korea? Have you been here before? Julia shook her head. No, this is my first time. A few looked surprised. Really? Sua asked. Then what brought you here? Before Julia could answer, Dae-young smirked. Maybe it's because of our famous CEO. Julia stiffened. Why do you say that? She asked carefully. Well, Mr. Kong is one of the most influential business figures in Korea. You must have heard of him, right? Heard of him? I married him. I might have, she murmured. Sua sighed dramatically. He's handsome but so cold. Have you seen him in person yet? Before Julia could respond, Dae-young smirked. Speak of the devil. The air shifted. Julia didn't need to look. She already knew. Slowly she turned. And there he was. Minjun. Dressed in a sleek black suit, his presence commanding attention. His sharp gaze swept across the room, briefly landing on their table. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met Julia's. A chill ran down her spine. He looked at her like a stranger would. Then, just as quickly, he looked away and walked toward a private section where the senior executives were seated. Julia's hands clenched into fists under the table. The man she had once called her husband had just looked right at her like a stranger. Julia didn't flinch. She didn't feel shocked or surprised anymore. She had already faced Minjun at his office earlier, had already experienced the cold truth that he didn't recognize her. Seeing him now, walking past as if she were just another employee, didn't matter anymore. Her heart had hardened. Her focus was on Nathan. Whatever happened beyond that, she didn't care. She turned back to her colleagues, picking up her chopsticks and continuing her meal as if nothing had happened. Sua, oblivious to Julia's thoughts, sighed dramatically. Mr. Kong is seriously intimidating in person. He doesn't even smile. Hyunwoo chuckled. That's just how he is. If you work hard, he won't bother you. Julia stayed silent, eating her food without reaction. Daeyoung leaned in. Julia, since you're new, let me give you some advice. Stay out of Mr. Kang's way. He doesn't tolerate mistakes. I understand, she said simply. She did understand. Minjun was no longer the man she once knew. She had already decided. Nathan was all that mattered now. Nothing else. When Julia arrived home, the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV. Jaiwoo, curled up on the couch, muted it as Julia set her bag down. You're back. How was your day? Julia sighed, slipping off her heels. Fine. Jaiwoo smirked. Just fine. How was the welcome party? They were nice. Jaiwoo studied her. You saw him, didn't you? Yes, Julia admitted. Did he? He didn't recognize me, Julia cut in. And I don't care. Jaiwoo's expression softened. Julia, Nathan is my priority. That's all that matters. Jaiwoo sighed but smiled. He was good today, ate well, went to bed early. Julia's features softened. Thank you. Any new friends at work? Jaiwoo teased. Julia allowed a small smile. A few. Good. Now rest. You have a long road ahead. Julia nodded. No matter what happened, she had already decided Minjun was her past. Nathan was her future. Meanwhile, across the city, Minjun loosened his tie immediately he entered his penthouse, but his mind was elsewhere. Julia. From the receptionist's desk to his office, and now the restaurant. Why did she feel so familiar? Frowning, he pulled out his phone and called Dr. Choi. Minjun. I met someone today. She feels familiar, but I don't know why. Dr. Choi was silent for a moment. It's possible your mind is reacting to something from your past. Amnesia doesn't always erase everything permanently. Minjun exhaled. So, what do I do? Don't force it. If she's truly connected to you, the memories will come on their own. Minjun hung up, staring at the ice in his glass. Who is Julia to him? And why did thinking about her make his chest feel so heavy? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.